r/askreddit. What is the thing we don't talk about in your family? How my parents were able to afford a house suddenly while working a minimum wage job and having recently immigrated to America dirt poor. They would never tell me where they got the money from. I caught my parents smoking weed once when I was young, and one day after I got yelled at for something, threatened that I knew a secret that could tear this family apart. I just finished taking DARE, so I thought that was a big deal. My parents flipped out. Turns out my dad was having an affair and my mom only had slight suspicions, and I brought the whole thing to light. The Thanksgiving meal prep where my mother got her hand stuck inside the frozen turkey for several hours. Bringing this one up gets you the laser beam eyes death glare. The friend of a close cousin who raped me. Everyone acts like it never happened. Better yet, he died a few years later and they all were part of the big memorial that has become an annual thing. They even wear rubber bracelets for the fugger. Pretty much disowned all my family. The time my mom was on Wheel of Fortune. It did not go well. Logistically, my sister's first child cannot possibly have been her husband's biological child, but he claimed the child as his own. They eloped about 6 weeks before he was born. There is no way he wasn't deployed when conception took place. She hasn't ever said a single word about it, but everyone knows. We're not sure if he's actually that bad at math, he is pretty dumb, or if he didn't care. The rampant alcoholism. Mom's side, my great uncle sexually assaulted my aunt when she was a child and seriously damaged her cervix. As a result, all of her children were seriously premature and some died as infants. Dad's side, my cousin murdered 2 people. But when he wasn't doing heroin and strangling women, he kept in touch with my mom and found the best bargains on small decorative porcelain houses for her. How sweet. Edit, spelling. That my family was very involved with a small 50 family top secret cult that included preparing for the end of the world and stockpiling canned goods and water in $1 million barn in the woods surrounded by small cabins. My parents got recruited for this cult when I was 4 years old and left when I was 15. It was our whole life. Everything revolved around it. All our money went into it. My parents can't talk about it. My mother flies into an insane rage. I've never told anyone the whole story start to finish. I doubt I ever will. I could write a book about the bizarre childhood I had. When my grandmother was diagnosed with end-stage cancer, she offered to kill my father who was caught molesting me. Edit, yes, my grandmother was a badass, but I'm biased. I really wish she could see this. She did survive for 7 years after her diagnosis. She was my mother's mother. She loved coffee, lots of cream and sugar, Carol Burnett, and teaching real estate, in the same coral pink suit, but most of all she loved her family. To all the survivors of abuse reading this, keep on keeping on. Don't let it define you. You were awesome before and you're awesome now. My grandfather had a lover for years before him and my grandmother divorced. He started seeing her a few years before I was born. Right after the divorce was final, my grandma died from cancer and my grandpa married his old lover. She has a son. 2 years older than me. Looks just like him. No one has dared to ask any questions. My cousin, who is a principal and was married with kids, had an affair with a teacher. She was also married. They both ended both of their marriages and got together. The teacher was my math teacher at the time while this all happened. Now they're married and I see them at family reunions. Extremely awkward for me. Edit, happy cake day OP. I had 2 uncles. My uncle accidentally ran over his brother when they were in their 20s and drunk one night. The brother died a few days later. That's not talked about. Only found out from my aunt when she was under anesthesia and blurting out all kinds of shit. My grandpa used to molest children. I was never affected personally. Yet my family is so big on the idea of second chances and forgiveness that it's incredibly taboo to talk about and everyone is just keen to forget about it. My mother literally excused it by saying that he was too old and too physically incapable of it anymore, so it no longer matters. Edited for clarity. My parents were never actually married and played it off like they were for 20+ years. Oh, and my dad cheated on my mom with a dude who dresses and drag for a living. That my mom had a baby at 17 and was forced to give it up for adoption. No one but a few people know, even less who will talk about it. My mom has never recovered from being tricked into giving up her baby. The physical abuse we suffered as kids. Parents have no idea what we're talking about when we bring it up. The fact that my brother and I still keep regular contact with our former stepfather, he and our mom got divorced 3 years ago. My brother and I still attend holidays with his side of the family, occasionally grab dinner, and get along well with his new fiancée. We don't tell our mom about any of this, although she is aware that we still talk to him. I mean, the man helped raise us, and we don't hold any grudges against him. Neither of us were willing to throw that relationship away simply because he and our mom weren't married anymore. We don't talk about the authentic shrunken heads my grandfather collected. They were buried with him. My sister is really my stepsister. Didn't find out till I was like 35. Edit, meant half sister. A few suicidal attention signs many of us used over the years. Kids learn from parents. So when mom said some dark shit to manipulate us a few times, we caved. When we learned it was a bluff, we started doing it, and one of my siblings even cut themselves a few times to get to what they wanted. It's fucked up. Now my mom is in her 60s and has claimed if she goes blind she will kill herself. But that was a few years ago we last heard that claim. My cousin actually committed suicide last year and there has been no cries for attention or manipulation after that. Plus we are all grown now and know better, but it was an emotionally abusive and manipulative way to grow up. My sister's weight. Extremely touchy subject. She started putting on the pounds at about age 11 and hit 375 before graduating from high school, along with other eating disorder standbys like hoarding and hiding food and stealing money to buy it. Her efforts to lose weight included things like pinning swimsuit model pin-ups to the fridge for encouragement. It didn't help that she was emotionally fragile and had anger management issues. My parents apparently thought that they could avoid conflict by banning all discussion of the most visible symptom of her failed coping skills. Boy, were they wrong. They didn't tolerate the lying or the stealing. There was some memorable shouting, but there was absolutely no treatment for the actual addiction, the source of the conflict. The bunny incident. So we had a bunny at our dad's house a few years ago. Its name was Wally. My dad has bad OCD, so he tried to wash it. For people who don't know, you don't wash bunnies. Spoiler alert. He died. The fact that 4/6 children have left our parents' religion, which is a huge social stigma and personal disappointment for them. Cousin's husband slept with other family member, who was 16. He was twice the girl's age. She hates the girl now, but is still with her husband. We really don't want to talk about it. When I was 8 until I was 10, I thought that the ghost of my grandparents' dog followed me around. I only ever imagined it, but the idea freaked my parents out, so they sent me to this kid therapy place. I don't know exactly what circumstances led to me being sent there, but I know that there were only a few sessions, and little progress was made. After one session, my dad told me to tell the therapist that I made everything up, and that I meant none of it. However, there was no further session for me to do this. I don't know why they ended, what specifically got me there in the first place, what the goal was, and why my dad suddenly wanted me to abruptly end the whole thing. What my parents never found out, I think, is that I also believed that I would legit gain superpowers, and this notion was connected to the ghost of my grandparents' dog. This whole time period is rather sensitive to me even now because I ruined the social life for my young self until we moved to a different town, for unrelated reasons, and I legitimately believed all of it. It scared my parents considerably that I might have some further undiagnosed mental disorder, though I'm fine now, as far as I know, and it's not something I can just brush off as kid stuff. There was some serious delusional shit going on. And just because the delusions were, obviously and expectedly, childish, doesn't mean that they weren't serious. It's really not something that I nor my parents want to bring up. How a group of my uncles and cousins, we're Latin, our family is huge, beat a man to death in broad daylight. My brother's mental disability. My mom had a half brother who was gay. My granddad, her father, kicked him out of the house when he was 18 after catching him with another man in the house. He died during the AIDS epidemic in the 80s, and my granddad didn't go to the funeral. I've only ever heard the story once from my mom. None of her sisters or my grandparents have ever mentioned it. I don't think I was ever supposed to know. But it makes me sad knowing I had an uncle that I could have related to, and I'll never get the chance to know him. Implying my family talks to each other in the first place. I accidentally texted my family I can't decide if jacking off at my great grandma's house is worth it or not instead of a different group chat. It doesn't get brought up, but oh boy do I think about it a lot. My mom. And the fact I have a different mom from my sisters. Oh, and how my mom died, or that I could also have the same disease that killed her, and basically anything that deviates from the outward perception we are the perfect little nuclear family. About all the abuse my brother inflicted on nearly every woman he saw. He was a rapist, child molester, and all-around abuser. He finally killed himself days after my oldest was born. He shot himself in the chest because his girlfriend baby mama wouldn't have sex with him. He started hitting her, demanding sex, so she started to do the right thing and leave. Then he threatened to kill himself. Everyone in the family was so saddened by his accidental death, except me. I was celebrating the death of my abuser, and only spoke the best of things about him. Every time I would try to speak the truth about him, I would get chastised about speaking poorly of the dead. I would always retort back, well, there isn't anything good to speak of about him. My mother's mental health. She hallucinated off and on for years and was never totally stable. She didn't believe there was anything wrong with her and never got help. But she told everyone in the immediate family, and she's mentioned that over the years she discussed her visions with various other people. Like, it's a known thing about her. But we never discussed it among ourselves at home when she wasn't in the room. No one outside of our immediate family, who also knows about her condition, has ever brought it up to me. I think if a bunch of us were ever in the same room and the subject came up in conversation, all of our brains would melt and pour right out of our ears. My mom's older brother is estranged from the family. Hasn't really spoken to anyone in the family in years, though he is sporadically in touch with my mom. I don't think he even called or sent condolences when my grandmother, his mom, died recently. My mom will bring him up sometimes like, Alan has nothing good to say about our parents, but I tell him he needs to get over it, blah blah blah. I can't even exactly remember what she says because she is always very vague. Every single time I ask, why doesn't he talk to grandma and grandpa? Every single time she says, oh, because, and then fucking drops it. So, I guess that is the thing we don't talk about. Interestingly, several years ago I asked my biological father, my mom's first husband, why my uncle doesn't talk to my mom or their parents. He gave me an answer. He said, well, I guess no one has told you, but your grandfather used to molest your mother when she was younger. He apologized later and she forgave him. You know, if I were in my uncle's position, I wouldn't fucking talk to them either, tbh. I haven't told my mom because while my father has never lied to me, this information is coming to me like second hand and I'm always wary of info like that. And also, that's not really a conversation I want to have with my mom unless she volunteers the info herself, and even then. The fact that my uncle has children with multiple prostitutes in the Philippines and Cuba. Grandma's secret biscuit collection. My great uncle got his cousin pregnant in the early 1930s and they had to get married. They had several children, and by all accounts their marriage was a happy one. It wasn't until I was putting together family trees, and both were long dead, that I realized what happened. My grandfather wasn't on speaking terms with his brother for a long time, not regarding this, but other family issues, so it was an easy subject to avoid. My 76-year-old grandmother died of an overdose. When I reached the hospital I saw the nurse start a Narcan drip. For those of you unaware, Narcan is used to reverse the effects of opiate overdose. My uncle had just died of a heroin overdose 2 years earlier. Her mom died a year earlier and my grandpa was moved to a nursing home weeks before, and I guess she couldn't handle it anymore. She got into my grandpa's morphine left behind at the house. I loved and respected her. She was a respected woman. She was warm, kind and had many friends, so my family wanted to keep who knew to a minimum. She was also a volunteer at the church, and you know how they can be with suicide. When she died, my aunt immediately said, "What will we tell people?" It was the most confusing time of my life. My grandfather came to the funeral so confused and just kept begging me to tell him what happened. Mind you, a year earlier they were both watching grandkids, living vibrant lives. My grandpa still worked. It was devastating. No one talks about it, ever. My grandfather died 12 days after her funeral. Those empty wine boxes in the trunk of her car. Good try, Mom. My grandfather's second wife. She manipulated him to get most of his money, and when he died she managed to get his gravestone inscribed only with words saying he was a loving husband to her. She's an asshole too. Mentioning her just pisses my dad off and puts him in a bad mood. We call her LV, or Lady Voldemort. I'm supposed to be a middle child. My mother had an ectopic pregnancy that nearly killed her before it was removed, and my father has confessed to me that he wished she hadn't gotten the abortion. My father wishes that my mother would die trying to keep an already dead fetus alive. I fucking hate my dad. My brother's hoarding. He's been without hot water since October because there is no room to move the old water heater down from the second floor, which was a terrible design in the first place. We're an Asian family, and he's the firstborn son, so apparently mental illness is fine and dandy. The one time I mentioned he might have mental health issues, my mom snapped at me. They live in Los Angeles, and I worry when a big earthquake hits you'll seriously get buried. I watch the Hoarders show to better understand him. He's a frugal, logical, cheap deal freebie hoarder, which is like the worst combination because the argument you should get rid of things to free up space in your house holds no water for him, and every argument he makes for why he has 5 of this one thing, or picked up this free thing, makes sense other than the fact all the stuff is getting out of control and not even being used. He's an avid reader also, and said Marie Kondo's book was triggering. So this is a kind of personal story that I still have no idea what actually happened, but I suspect night terrors. When I was in 4th grade I randomly hallucinated in the middle of the night that the walls and floor of my room were covered in huge spiders, and I don't mean a few here and there, I mean the walls were made of spiders and almost forming hands to come out and grab me. And worst part was I couldn't fucking move the whole time. So I just stopped sleeping for a week, and then every time I tried to sleep after that it kept happening, so I'd force myself to keep staying awake. Needless to say my parents were terrified. I ended up in a hospital, none of the tests came back with anything and I was fighting any tranquilizer they gave me to not sleep. It was so bad I didn't sleep for so long my brain was trying to shut down. Eventually they gave me enough high-powered drugs to keep an adult down and after that it never happened again. My mother swears I was possessed and I don't remember much about that week, but we just kind of pretend it never happened. Until I was 22 and hitting a super stressful patch of life in college and it happened again. But I was older and was able to recognize it was sleep paralysis and some super fucked up hallucinations. I think I've realized the incident back then was also sleep paralysis. I was just too young to really understand what was happening and was just too horrified to sleep. But my parents swear up and down it was demon possession. Me being probably gay. Dad's side, the fact that both me and my dad have been sexually abused by another family member. Mum's side, the cousins or something who are like Pettis and those abuse their kids since we don't talk to them and I've never met them. My other family. Our feelings. My mom thinks people are following her, bugging her house, hiding cameras in the attic, etc. Kind of like a conspiracy theory. And it's all in her head. Nobody says a word about it. It's pretty bizarre being that I'm the only one my mom trusts to actually unload all of it on and begs me not to tell my father because he will just get mad and roll his eyes or shrug it off. But that's all I do is listen, because I don't want to feed further into her dementia. It is pretty sad. I want my mom back. Me, I am the thing my mom and siblings and relatives don't talk about. That my uncle molested my older cousin from ages 6-10 and nobody will acknowledge that he still keeps in contact with his kids, our other cousins, and is an illegal citizen who should be on a sex offender registry but just isn't. The wholesale sellout by my mom who had 4 of us before she married the next man. After that we didn't matter and his 2 kids did. It fucked us bad. Wag lady update said 4 of us. My cousin is adopted, So until he finds out from his parents, we don't talk about it. Why we dissociated with a family friend. He's a pedophile and it took us 16 years to figure that out. My sexuality. I came 2 years ago as bi at age 29. I have lots of gay friends, so I didn't think it would be a big deal. Boy was I wrong. Mum said I was ruining the plans she had for my future, and my dad walked out of Christmas dinner. I'd love to say at 31, I am secure enough in my life to not care about their reaction, but it stung badly. My girlfriend dumped me a year ago today, and I haven't dated since, partially because I am afraid if I meet a woman, it will cause an uproar. My uncle on my father's side is a pedophile. He raped his own sister when he was young. He then molested his son, my cousin, when he was a child. My cousin molested me after. Nobody talks about it. Not even my cousin. My uncle never have been talked to about it either. Never had any punishment. His daughter and grandchildren still see him often. He is still married, and everyone acts normal with him, despite everyone knowing what he did. And since nobody ever talks about it, I couldn't know. Maybe he raped so much more people, and same goes for his son, my cousin. But it's not all. All my uncles and aunts from my father's side are alcoholics and depressive, because of their childhoods. Nobody ever talks about it either. I don't really know what happened, but it appears it wasn't good. And it's not even all. My grandma died a couple years ago. I always wondered why one of my aunt hated her so much. Until I knew the truth. When my grandma was pregnant with her 5th baby, she tried to self-abort the baby in secret. She really didn't want another baby. She couldn't use contraceptive because my grandpa and her were super Catholic and didn't want to go against God's will to procreate. She used a knitting pick inside her until it bled and the fetus came out. But she was pregnant with twins. The other baby survived. When my grandmother realized it, she had to keep it because it was too late. The survivor was my aunt. Nobody ever talks about it. I don't know if there's other shit. My family is really fucked up. TLDR. My uncle is a pedophile. Raped his own sister and own son. His son became a raper because of him. All this family side are alcoholics and depressed because of their childhood. My grandmother self-inflicted an abortion to get rid of her 5th baby, but it turns out it was twins, so she only killed one of the 2 babies and had to keep the survivor. Sorry for grammar, English is not my first language, I hope it's readable. Edit, I added the TLDR part. My short-lived but that definitely happened Britney stage, 2013, no merchandise or any bullshit from it, but still not proud of it.